A Matrice si è sentito un elicottero poco fa, però qui non c'è nessuno.
E avete delle notizie del sindaco? Sta arrivando?
Sì.
Che cosa ci può dire? Che cosa sta vedendo in questo momento?
Sta vedendo tutto rotto, tutto per terra, le strade rotte, la macchina era rotta, ha fatto un disastro.
Anche le strade sono venute giù?
Sono venute giù le case, tutto. Io mi sono fermato per poco.
Lei che cosa ha fatto durante la prima scossa? Si è precipitato in strada?
Ho avuto il tempo di vestirmi almeno e poi precipitato per strada, ma si passava male, tutte le macerie, tutto sfasciato, sono rotte le condotte dell'acqua, un disastro.
E lei era da solo in casa?
No, c'era mia sorella, mio cognato.
E voi comunque vi siete salvati, siete usciti
sì,
immediatamente dalla casa e siete andati in strada?
Subito. Però qui c'è una signora che non risponde, la casa è crollata completamente.
Amatrice è un paese abitato prevalentemente d'estate?
Sì, adesso era il colmo proprio, tanta gente.
Quante persone ci saranno state quindi in più?
Non lo so, le persone tante ce ne sta adesso.
Dalla Protezione Civile è stato definito un sisma severo, quindi lei ha avuto mai esperienza diretta di un terremoto in quella zona?
Sì, qualche cosa aveva fatto prima quando ha fatto all'Aquila, però non era così. E qui è proprio forte, non so.
Le scosse che ci sono state nel 2009, quando poi c'è stato appunto il terremoto dell'Aquila, le avete sentite anche voi da Amatrice?
Sì, però ha fatto qualche piccolo danno, ma...
Ecco, noi adesso ci possiamo collegare al volo con il sindaco di Amatrice. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Ha detto che cosa è successo ad Amatrice? Ha detto
guardi, visto che voi ci potete dare una mano.
Sembra essere uno dei comuni più colpiti dal sisma di questa notte. C'è stata la prima scossa alle 3:33 e noi abbiamo anche in diretta Dario Nanni, che è l'autore della foto che continuate a vedere sullo schermo. Buongiorno, che cosa sta vedendo? Che cosa ha visto quando ha scattato questa fotografia?
Pronto? Sì. Qui siamo a Spelonga, ci sono stati diversi crolli, non ci sono vittime. Abbiamo fatto una rassegna, un esame del paese, siamo a 1000 metri, un paese zeppo di gente in quanto è in atto un festeggiamento molto importante. Non ci sono vittime, perlomeno qui a Spelonga, ma ci sono.
But the question is going to be, is this going to stop? Are we going to keep feeling these tremors, and is there going to be more damage with each of these aftershocks? That's obviously the question. And certainly, as I said, the way we felt it here in Rome, it's hard to imagine what it must have been like close to that epicenter.
It must have been absolutely terrifying to have been there at the epicenter. As you mentioned, the aftershocks, which Jenna Pursley from the USGS made clear were still taking place. Have you felt anything more there in Rome?
Yeah, about 15 minutes ago, we felt another aftershock that shook the building. Again, I'm on a fifth floor building in the center of Rome, and it really shook the building. And people are out on their balconies. I went out on mine. People are out, wondering what went on. There are car alarms going off. The alarm, the bottom of the building where I live was going off. People, are feeling these aftershocks. Of course, the building. This is a long way away. I'm not suspecting we're going to see any significant damage, but maybe cracks in walls and things like that in Rome. But definitely, it was felt in the center of Rome.
And Bobby, tell us a little bit more about this region that this quake struck. You mentioned that is an area that people have holiday homes in. You mentioned that it would be quite densely populated at this time of year. Give us some sense of the environment that we're talking about.
Right. This area where the epicenter was is in Umbria, which is a very popular tourist destination, almost as popular as Tuscany, really, where people come and spend, a couple of weeks in an agriturismo or have their mountain villages. People spend a lot of time out of the city in these areas during the summer. Very populated in that sense. Lots and lots of hotels. There will be lots of tourists who are enjoying the Italian countryside in these areas as well. And you know, one of the reasons people flock to the area is because of the architecture. It's so beautiful, these ancient churches, ancient buildings, old walls, cities, hilltop towns. All of these things that draw people there are also obviously going to be dangerous in a situation like an earthquake. And of course, you know, authorities are going to not be able to just let people go back to business as usual, even if the aftershocks stop. They're going to have to make sure that there's no damage, no fissures in these old walls before they're able to, you know, let people go back. If, you know, when we get to that point, we've seen this before. We saw it in L'Aquila in 2009. We saw it in Assisi. Those are two cities, you know, in this general area that were heavily affected by earthquakes, and people still not living normally after those earthquakes. So again, though, people are used to it there in the sense that they'll be able to get civil protection authorities and emergency vehicles, you know, in place at a very reasonable, I would guess, time. But it's obviously not going to be of much comfort to people who have, you know, gone out into the streets whose balconies have fallen off their houses, which are the kinds of pictures we're seeing on the Italian media so far.
And a situation like this, as you mentioned, this is a quake zone. We saw something like this in L'Aquila in 2009. How does the emergency response play out? Is it led by local authorities? Is it directed from Rome? What can you tell us about, you know, what might be happening in terms of an operation on the ground?
Well, the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, his office has already announced that they're in touch with the local with the national civil protection authorities, which means it's going to be coming out of Rome. They will have people already there, you know, by helicopter at this point, I would guess, coming from Rome, you know, just to make sure that people are safe, that people aren't trapped, that buildings aren't on the verge of falling down. You know, we also saw a few years ago an earthquake in Emilia-Romagna, which was a little bit further north, in which we saw these old bell towers falling down in the days after the earthquake. A lot of the problem, as I mentioned before, is just that these structures are so old. That's what obviously draws people to live and visit this area. But because they're so old, you know, 200-300 years or more old, they're not that safe, especially in a situation like an earthquake. But, you know, this is an earthquake zone. This is a place where earthquakes and tremors are felt quite frequently. None, of course, as strong as this. This is a very, very strong earthquake, according to the local authorities here and according to the USGS, the one that struck it first at 3:36 this morning local time, and about an hour later, 4:45 a.m. local time, we felt another tremor that was that the U.S. Geological Survey and others have noted as well.
All right. Bobby Nadeau, I know you want to go and work your sources, make some calls, do some things to get some more information for us. We're going to let you go. We will come back to you shortly. Thank you for the update. And meteorologist Pedram Javaheri. Pedram, I know you've been looking at the models. What have you been seeing? What can you tell us?
Yeah, you know, Aisha, it doesn't look good. The initial estimations on this from the USGS, and of course they have access to thousands of earthquakes in a similar magnitude in a similar location with whether it be geography or population exposed, and they are giving it a red alert, which is the highest alert for likelihood of damage, that being property damage, and of course the highest likelihood of fatalities as well, also in a red zone across this region. And you take a look at it, of course, as you heard in the previous discussion there with your phone call, Aisha, this is an area that is not only populated, but of course a lot of the buildings, historic in nature, very structures that are not going to be able to withstand the magnitude of shaking that we saw here, especially at the shallow nature of this earthquake, sitting less than 10 kilometers. So you're talking about much less buffering to take place from beneath the Earth's surface as this quake rocks this region. So sitting just a little over 100 kilometers away from a city of 2.5 million people being Rome, that's an incredible earthquake that's going to be felt quite a ways away, and particularly in Rome, where we know at least moderate shaking was felt. And since this quake struck at 3:30 in the morning, that's something else worth noting. When you're talking about people being asleep potentially during this time, we often say quakes do not kill people. It is structures that kill people, and at 3:36 in the morning, the vast majority of these people are going to be inside structures. So that's something that's certainly worth following over the next couple of hours as we learn more about what's occurring here. But here's the information, the latest information we have of this quake. And at that 6.2 magnitude, 10 kilometers is actually the standard depth USGS provides to all earthquakes when the information initially comes in. They can modify this, bring this down, even make it more of a shallower number. But of course, the quake has already occurred, so the damage already in place. So now we're going to watch and see how many aftershocks come from a quake like this. And historically, I can put the numbers there in perspective for you of how many aftershocks you see. But just take a look at what's occurred across this region with 6.5 million million people having felt strong shaking across this area. You work your way to the very strong categories, surrounding areas around the initial area of impact. There are 231,000 people felt very strong shaking, and even some people, about 10,000 folks, felt severe shaking. So that's why we think the highest potential for a loss of life and also property damage will be very close to the epicenter of this particular quake. And historically, when you have a 6.2, you bring down at least one aftershock within 1 order of magnitude less. That would be a 5.2. We have had an aftershock, I believe it was at about 5.6, that has occurred, and 2 other aftershocks have occurred since this quake in the last hour that have been in the 4 magnitude, which you would see typically 10 of. So once the ground has already been destabilized, you get these quakes that follow suit. It's going to cause more and more damage until people get away from their properties that have now been jeopardized across this region of Italy. And of course, the information there at this point just limited. We're learning more and more about what's occurring with this particular earthquake. But I can just look at some of the data from the USGS, and they're saying estimated economic losses could exceed about $1 billion in damage based on historical quakes across this region of similar magnitude and similar depth. So they're giving it about a 35% likelihood that would be $1 billion damage or more. That is the highest percentage block they're giving to the amount of property damage that's potential with this. So Aisha, this is certainly a story that is going to be something worth following over the next couple of hours. Is oftentimes you can tell with earthquakes if they're serious or not, but because of the area this is located in, it has the potential to be very serious.
Yeah, it certainly does. And Pedram, not to put you on the spot, but this 6.2 quake that we are discussing now, give us some perspective on this quake compared to what we saw in L'Aquila in 2009, which caused an extraordinary amount of damage.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be incredible because that depth is really what's important. So oftentimes people hear the magnitude and they think 6.2, not much. Across parts of Asia, you will see multiple 6.2s and greater on a daily basis, but the depths are several hundred kilometers deep. So at this magnitude, Aisha, and with what USGS is telling us now based on historical data in this particular region, quakes of this magnitude do cause a lot of damage and a lot of loss to life across the area. In fact, they have an estimated fatality placed on this with the percentage blocks there, and also a 35% chance. That's the highest percentage they're giving to any fatality number. That would be at least from 100 to 1,000. It's a big gap of numbers, but it is likely that the number of lives lost with a quake like this would be between 100 to 1,000. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of the severity of it as well.
Yeah, indeed. Pedram, we appreciate it. Do stand by for us. I want to bring in Barbie Nadeau once more, CNN contributor, who's joining us on the phone from Rome, and she felt the quake there. In fact, it woke her up. Barbie, what are you seeing now? I know that you're monitoring local media.
Yeah, no, the local media is showing more and more pictures, people sending in pictures. Most of what we're seeing are damaged cars, things that have fallen off buildings onto cars, balconies falling off, pieces of buildings falling off. We haven't seen any sort of pictures so far of any churches or any of the more historical buildings that may have been compromised in this earthquake. But you've got lots and lots of people tweeting, reporting, using social media to talk about what they felt from Rome to, especially in the areas right near the epicenter. I spoke